today's panel discussion, which is titled Maximizing Energy Efficiency and Waste Heat Recovery, How Can Policy Help? So we saw earlier today the presentation of the main results from the HEATLEAP project when it comes to the environmental and economic benefits of waste heat recovery systems. In this panel discussion, we're now going to explore the policy options to promote waste heat recovery in the European Union. And to do that, I have the pleasure of welcoming on stage Anne Weidenbach. She's from the Cabinet of Energy Commissioner Kadri Simson. Next to her is Monica Frassoni. She's president of the European Alliance to Save Energy. At the far end there is Marco Baresi. He's Institutional Affairs Director at Turboden, and he's also board member of Euroheat and Power. Third next is Alexandra Tudoroiu-Lakavičė, Head of Policy at COGEN Europe, and finally Jozefien Vanbecelaere, Head of EU Affairs at the European Heat Pump Association. Welcome to all of you. We'll get started straight away with the discussion. Let me just remind you that, of course, you're welcome to put your questions to the panelists. If you're online, just use Zoom and put your questions there. And of course, if you're in the room, just raise your hand. Right, so to get started with the discussion, let me start with you, Anne Weidenbach. Maybe you can give us a quick overview from the European Commission's perspective about waste heat recovery. What is the potential from the Commission's perspective, and what is the current policy framework that we have at EU level?
Hello. It's working? Okay, good. Good to be here. Thanks a lot for the kind introduction. Also, good afternoon to the fellow panelists. Regarding the potential, clearly waste heat has an enormous potential from our perspective. So it's a valuable source to contribute to our energy transition. But just to clarify, when I talk about waste heat, what we mean, that it's contributing to our targets would require that waste heat is the result or outcome before, after first measures have been taken. So waste heat can only contribute to decarbonization and energy efficiency improvements if this waste heat cannot be avoided further. So basically, I just want to point out that also from my background, energy efficiency whenever is needed. We estimated the potential for waste heat based on the comprehensive assessments member states submitted in 2020, and there we identified a potential of 250 MTUE. And to put it in a context, it would mean why we think this is a huge impact. We have a 2030 energy efficiency target, which is primary energy consumption of almost 1,000 MTUE. So it means it's more or less 1/4 is the potential for the use of waste heat. But I guess that the potential could be even bigger if member states would, let's say, improve their assessments. Only half of the member states, they assess the potential for waste heat, and the other one just focused the other half only on industry. So I guess that the potential might be even bigger, which is important for us. So, but what is the potential if it cannot be avoided? Yeah, on-site use is important and can contribute to energy efficiency overall, but off-site use also for the decarbonization needs. The Commission is working on the effective use of waste heat since many years already. Let's say in 2012 we had a guidance on air ventilation as by ventilating heat. Then we also had first requirements in the Energy Efficiency Directive by requiring the comprehensive assessment. We also had in the EPBD, I guess, a solid framework. And there I want to point to one fact. Even if waste heat is not explicitly mentioned in the EPBD, it plays a big role in the definition of net zero emission building, or net emission buildings, or ZEBs, where we say, of course, the buildings should consume energy only produced on site, but if technically feasible, also waste heat should be used. Furthermore, we have now the EED recast, luckily political agreement achieved, where we have requirements for efficient district heating and cooling, where, let's say, in milestones, 75% of the heat in district heating and cooling should be renewables or waste heat by 2045. And just as an outlook, or what is the potential? I mean, the potential of waste heat, what I said is energy efficiency and decarbonization, but it also contributes to competitiveness, of course. So by improving the way we use waste heat, especially the industry sector could benefit from. And one thing I'm really waiting for is also considering use of waste heat in the context of the LNG terminals that are now built. And there are member states who will build further LNG terminals. And I haven't seen it, but I believe that this is also one source of coal that could be reused for industry purposes. So in this regard, I hope, and just as a last point, what we are working on also to further unlock the potential, DG ENER is currently working on a heat pump action plan. It appears as if it would only cover heat pump actions, but it will also work on district heating and the reuse of waste heat. So just as a framework and potential. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Anne, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions later on, of course, about what more can be done. Monica Frassoni, turning to you now, you've been working on energy efficiency policies for a number of years now. What is your perspective when it comes to waste heat recovery? Is that something you believe has been somehow neglected until now?
I believe that the whole agenda, well, first of all, hello. So my name is Monica. The European Alliance to Save Energy is an organization which is there since, as you said, a few years, and it is composed by big companies dealing with energy efficiency technologies, big multinationals, and then some think tanks and NGO which are very active also on this point. And indeed, the answer to your question is the whole agenda of energy efficiency has been neglected in terms of potential. And I believe that this is politically something that is not completely solved in this moment, and that needs to be repeated all the time, and examples all the time, and advantages all the time, and the benefits all the time. And this is very strange because, you know, when you're speaking to high-level politicians, they tell you, but I am completely aware that the best energy is the one that we don't use. Okay, then, so I think that there is a lot, as Anne was saying, there is a lot that has been done, but we are still in a territory that needs to be put a lot of value and emphasis on. And waste heat is certainly one of the most important issues. It's very interesting that in the political discussion about waste heat and in general energy efficiency in industry, the accent is very much put on the fact that Europe is really at the forefront in terms of efficiency in its industry. But still, the capacity of industry to become even more efficient is still quite big. It is calculated more or less by 20%. And then, as very well, as Anne said very well, there is all the waste heat, which is not necessarily related to industry. And there it's really very big, exactly as we are speaking, for example, about buildings or transport. So I believe that there is, in terms of legislation, we are little by little getting there. But the backlash that we are living now, also under a cultural point of view, about the Green Deal and about the speed of the transition, is also something that is affecting energy efficiency a lot, because there is a difference between you being wise and turn off your lights and therefore save energy, and really putting in practice a system by which you are also pushing new companies, changing the way in which you produce, changing the way in which consumers actually are in the market. So I think that that is something that we still need to work, and the way to do it are three. First, by disseminating this kind of contents, and also underline all the time where are the advantages. Second is to have the proper legislation for companies and industry. It's very important that you are not saying something, deciding something, and then come back, or being completely so a legislation which is so full of derogation and exception that you don't understand anything, or it is very difficult to be implemented. And this is certainly something that we don't have fully, although of course, luckily, Energy Efficiency Directive went through before this big wave changed, and this is not the case for EPBD. Hopefully that the legislation will come out somehow. And the third point is, of course, finance and implementation. And I am absolutely convinced that the best way to get financial streams going in the right direction is certainly to have a good legislation.
Yeah. We'll go back to the legislation later on in more detail, obviously. Now, let me turn to you, Alexandra Tudoroiu-Lakavičė. Your perspective on waste heat recovery. Why is this topic important for COGEN Europe?
Okay, thanks for the question, and good afternoon, everyone. In fact, both as COGEN Europe and as representing the cogeneration sector, but also as a partner of the HEATLEAP project, we tend to look at the overall energy system. So we don't want to build CHP for the sake of CHP by itself, but really in a way that energy systems are more efficient, and that energy solutions are optimally used. So in terms of the potential, the way we look at waste heat, or the avoidance of waste heat, or energy efficiency in general, is that we must first avoid the waste of heat. And if you look at waste heat potentials, most of it is actually, it actually relates to the power sector. So whenever there's a fuel that is used to produce electricity, either coal or natural gas, or thermal renewables like biomass, biogases, hydrogen, residual waste, you have a lot of heat that is wasted. If you see cooling towers, you will often see steam coming out of those cooling towers, and that's really heat that is wasted. Instead, you could be doing CHP, recovering that heat and then using it in district heating or using it in industry. So that's one route or one way of looking at the avoidance of waste heat and energy efficiency first. Then you have industries that need process heat for their processes, to melt things or to dry things or to produce different products. And that's where you can also recover the waste heat and either use it in district heating directly, if that's an option, or use it further to produce electricity or both electricity and heat. So there's a range of different sources for waste heat recovery. And also there's a range of different applications. It can either be district heating, or it can be for the production of electricity, which is becoming increasingly important for our energy systems. So yeah, from our perspective, we think that there's quite a lot of potential there. We just need to make sure that our definitions and our incentives are technology open, and they can allow all of the applications to actually be implemented.
Right. We'll go that certainly in the policy discussion later on, because indeed there could be an issue sometimes with definitions of what constitutes waste heat or not. Jozefien Vanbecelaere, from the point of view of the European Heat Pump Association, what is the potential of waste heat recovery?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think some of the points that have been mentioned already also by Anne and Monica, that actually in the comprehensive assessments, only half of the countries does them, and only half of them only then look at industry. But there's so much more than industry only as a source, as a waste heat source. We should look at this potential much broader. So in the HEATLEAP paper, I saw this number of 300 terawatt hours per year, but we have another study that speaks about 2,860 terawatt hours a year. So it's really, you can compare it to the EU's total energy demand for heat and hot water for residential and service sector buildings. And this really looks at both industry, but also at, for example, metro tunnels and metro stations, which also have waste heat. For example, cooling on commercial buildings, because wherever you have cooling, you have excess heat. So the back of your fridge, it's warm because it extracts the heat from inside the fridge. So it's dissipated outside. So all the cooling processes, all of that is waste heat that can be captured. Supermarkets that are also a clear example of that, wastewater facilities. So there are data centers, which now have been taken up in the Energy Efficiency Directive. So I think that's a very good first next step, and we could use this example also for other sources. But I really think we have to open this scope, and you say we will discuss the definitions later, but also really open this definition, as also Alexandra said, to not exclude certain technologies or certain sources. So I think it's very important to open it and see that there's much more potential than we currently look at and member states are currently looking at.
Okay, thank you. And Marco Baresi to close the initial round. So from the perspective of the industry, what is the potential? We've heard different numbers, so the ways of actually evaluating the potential can differ. So how did you evaluate that at a European level, and maybe how can the European then tap into that potential?
Yes, good afternoon. I have seen in the project we estimate some figures related to the potential of waste heat recovery, but let me say something related to waste heat recovery. First of all, industrial processes like energy intensive industry we see this morning, or in Martin this afternoon, steel industries, or for example data center, need to cool the process. So they spend money to cool the process. It means, for example, to install the fans, to use quench tower or cooling tower. So they spend money, water and resources to cool down the process. On the other side, we have an enormous amount of waste heat that could be recovered. If you don't recover the waste heat, you simply wasted in the atmosphere the hot air. So it means that you are losing money. I have in my mind For example, carnival confetti during the carnival period is the same to do carnival confetti with 200 euros banknote, in my opinion. So it's very similar, because I live in a very high density industrialized city, and when you saw this waste heat from the industrial side steel or the other, I have in my mind this effect. Third, waste heat is a completely CO2-free resources. So we have to consider that we don't need to burn materials or primary energy to obtain this energy from the waste heat. In fact, in the US, for example, in some states of the US, waste heat is considered renewable. And in fact, there are some specific policy related to this amount. Related the amount, the potential waste heat recovery, two figures. The first one, from one side, we have waste heat from industry that are industry and data center that are quite the same amount of the heat needed to heat the domestic house in Europe. So the balance. Other figures from whole project we have done in the past related the high temperature waste heat available in the processes that could be valorized to produce electricity. If you recover the waste heat from steel, cement, glass industry, and you produce electricity with this high temperature waste heat, the amount is in the range of 150 terawatt-hour per year. So it means 5% of the electricity consumption at European level. So if you recover all the technical potential from heavy industries, you can generate the 5% of the electricity currently used at European level.
Okay. Thank you. It was interesting what you said about the definition in the US, right? I mean, they consider waste heat as being renewable. Is that something you believe Europe should be doing as well? Because it seems there are different ways of qualifying waste heat depending on where it comes from.
In my opinion, yes, in the energy efficiency directive, but there are people more involved in policy than me. There are a definition of waste heat close to renewable related to the thermal use. So if you use waste heat for thermal purpose like district heating, you can assimilate at renewable, if I remember well. There are a lot of things to do. For example, in the taxonomy, the waste heat to power is not considered at all. Is a missing part, not a way to cut off so we have to work, for example, to include this waste heat to power into this definition.
And from what you know, in the United States, the fact that it's been qualified as renewable, does that actually help in terms of recuperating this waste heat? Does it act as an incentive?
Yes, is quite recent, but if you think, for example, on the Inflation Reduction Act, is a clear message, and these kind of technologies could be included. So is a boost, for example, to do this kind of installation. Of course, United States is not so ahead as Europe in terms of energy efficiency. So they have to start from not from zero, but from the beginning. But it's relevant that, for example, waste heat is classified not in all states, but in main states are considered.
Okay, interesting. And Weidenbach, maybe a reflection on this. I mean, could we imagine, considering something like qualifying waste heat as renewable in Europe, or is that a non-starter?
Basically, I would say we need to get the push from something else, because I mean, clearly waste heat is, let's call it excessive heat then. But I would also say it's important not to greenwash everything. So if it really depends from what the waste heat is coming from. And I think you can see it, and this is already implemented in the RED in Renewable Energy Directive, where you have sub-target for heating and cooling, and if you have heating and cooling systems, you only buy renewables, the share to be achieved is lower than if you have waste heat. So if waste heat is included, you have 1.3% as a minimum, which gives an indication that we say, yeah, waste heat use is good, but we clearly want to have real renewables, let's say, supported with a target. But I think with a holistic approach we provided, and which is not the perfect one, but needs to be further implemented and improved, I think we will at some point have a situation where we are talking about waste heat corresponds to renewables. If we really, I mean, there will be still sectors in the future which are hard to abate, where you still need or rely on hydrogen or fossil fuels. But I think maybe in 2050 we can talk about waste heat as a renewable source, maybe.
And something like a single definition of waste heat, is that something that you think would make sense at some point? Because I understand now it's quite fragmented, right? Depending on where the heat actually comes from, how it's being produced. I'm brainstorming here. I'm not saying this is, you know, Commission policy, but is that something you've been discussing internally?
I mean, I would find it difficult at this point in time to find a definition, because it would mean we need an agreement, and I'm not sure if the definition of waste heat would really help to improve the overall energy system. I think it's more important to discuss and negotiate hard on what do we really want to achieve, what energy should the industry consume, what energy should buildings consume, private households. So I think it's right now, maybe it's different in 10 or 15 years with other discussions, but to discuss more the content on, is it better to have heat pumps or connected to local district heating, or I think this is, from my perspective, more important. And then by discussing these systematic approaches, you end up by discussing the value of waste heat, I would say.
Monica Frassoni, maybe a reflection. I mean, you agree, considering waste heat as renewable, that would be greenwashing in your view?
No, but I think that our aim is to be carbon neutral by 2050. Okay, there are several ways to reach this goal, but not always. So there are some people who are talking all the time about technological neutrality, which according to me is a complete greenwash exercise, because it is not true that all technologies participate or are effective in the same way to decarbonize. Whether you like it or not, that's a reality. So if I am a legislator, or if I want to push legislation that is helping to reduce the need of energy, I also, because I don't want to see it in silos. And so also heat waste should not be seen as a silo. It's not that the fact that it's a heat waste that it's excessive heat that comes from gas is the same than coming from something else or from renewables. Is not the same. Is it a problem from the waste heat producers? Probably not. But it is a problem for those who believe that in order to deal with the decarbonization, you have to get rid of gas. So I think that we have to be a little bit, more evolved, because it was the same problem in the sector of energy efficiency. Because energy efficiency, you can be more effective also if you are dealing with gas or oil. But the point here is that you have to participate in decarbonization, and this moment, the technologies that are helpful to do that are renewables and energy efficiency, meaning reducing the need of consumption. And waste heat is a great way to help this systematic approach. But according to me, it's a bit difficult to say everything is the same. No, it's not. So I believe that waste heat, but on the other hand, I do understand that it's not for tomorrow morning that you will abandon all fossil fuels or to do steel or cement with the procedures that you are doing now. And so for those who are dealing with waste heat, of course, this is something important. You know, it's a question of approach and of how much responsibility you take as a sector to actually participate in the decarbonization, which goes beyond the capacity or not of producing waste heat. I don't know if that was clear.
If I
Go ahead.
jump into, but don't forget what's happened 1 year ago with the Ukrainian crisis. So last summer, we arrived at the cost of electricity at 600 euro per megawatt hour for domestic people and for industry. So in my opinion, if we have waste heat available to produce power, we have to generate everything we can do.
No, but that's exactly, sorry, just to make sure that we understand each other. I fully agree. But what I believe is that in reality, the general conversation, the question was, can you consider waste heat as renewable as such? According to me, no. It depends from when it comes from. But on the other hand, it is clear that in this very moment, it is much better, even if you produce, even if you use gas, it's much better to recuperate heat.
Right.
But we were talking about the definitions.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation because Alexandra, Tudoroiu-Lakavičė, maybe you have views on that. Do these definitions really matter?
If the definition of waste heat matters, yes, it does matter, because then the waste heat as defined in the Renewables Directive counts towards the definition of efficient district heating, which then counts towards how district heating will be configured for the next decades or so. So the definition matters. Now, what I then think is, okay, we have a European definition for waste heat in the Renewables Directive. Then in the Energy Efficiency Directive, we have a slightly different understanding of waste heat for the heating and cooling assessments. And what we see as COGEN Europe is that it's actually more effective to look at the local level, see what sources of heat you have, see where you're wasting heat, where you have excess heat, what other renewable heat sources you have, and then come up with what is the potential, rather than having a top-down waste heat definition, which restricts quite a lot what can be counted as waste heat. So I think we need to correlate more the heating and cooling assessments, the bottom-up approach with the top-down approach of prioritizing what is waste heat and how it can be counted, and in which applications and end uses it can be counted. I think that's where we have a disagreement, I would say.
So you'd say a definition would help, but it needs to be broad and flexible enough, right? Jozefien, Vanbecelaere, maybe your point of view about these questions of definitions, because as soon as we start talking about specifics of policy, definitions is really the basis, really.
Yeah, first of all, I really think the word waste heat is really not the best wording. Some people have mentioned already the wording of excess heat, and that's so much better, because now we're talking about waste heat recovery, so it's not wasted, it's recovered. So we should use another word to show that this is not waste, but it's really, so I think excess heat would cover it much better. And then I think it's really necessary, as I mentioned in the beginning as well, to really broaden the scope. But there indeed, of course, waste heat or excess heat and from, for example, a supermarket is not always the best fit to feed into a district heating and cooling system. So that should not go in the same type of definition or calculation, but it should be recognized, and this is not at the moment the case. So definitions are also important to recognize all these potentials and to list them and to make member states aware of them, make other stakeholders aware of them, because at the moment there's really a lack of awareness of all these sources. So from that perspective, I think an additional type of definition or a broader definition is needed to really cover the broad, excess heat that is there, and that should be untapped, because it's one of the largest untapped sources of energy.
And then find ways of trying to tap it.
Exactly.
So regarding Marco Baresi, let me turn to you for this one. So from your industry perspective, what would be the missing pieces of the puzzle when it comes to policy that would help tap in that resource, whether you call it excess heat or waste heat?
First of all, I agree. We need a more harmonized waste heat definition. So we have to work better on it. The waste heat recovery definition, if I remember well, appears for the first time in 2020 in the RED directive. It was a bit confused, so we need to work more to act more in order to have a better definition. On the other side, we make a lot of effort in the last years to study a regulatory framework more in electricity, in the power sector. I have not in my mind something related to the heat. There is not a heat incentive scheme set at European level, if I'm not wrong. So, in my opinion, we have to work better on that. And if I can be provocative, in the Energy Efficiency Directive, there is a mandatory waste heat recovery for the data center, more than 1 megawatt, but there is no mandatory issue related energy intensive industries, for example, or gas distribution system. We have seen this in the technical session, technologies to recover the heat from industry, for example, and in the distribution system of the gas. Currently, the gas distribution system must be efficient or inefficient is not a problem. So also to focus in the gas distribution system could be an option to increase this awareness. Yes, I believe also industry needs a clear long-term signal in terms of policy. So if we are working in order to valorize the waste heat, we need a long-term policy, because industry needs long-term agreement, in long-term vision, in order to do investment and to plan the activities.
Okay, thank you. Monica Frassoni, maybe I'll turn to you with a similar question about the gaps, the policy gaps. I mean, we're almost done with adopting the Fit for 55 package. It's been a bit of a rough ride for the Energy Efficiency Directive, but it did go through the finishing line. So do you see any big gaps remaining on energy efficiency, generally speaking, and maybe more specifically about waste heat or excess heat recovery?
I think that first of all, I think that the legislation as it is now on the Energy Efficiency Directive does have a little bit of a gap here and there, because it is a product of a compromise. So as always, it is like this in terms of targets. But also, my main worry is the possible imbalance between the ambition at European level by fixing the rules and the capacity at the national level of implementing them, because you don't have binding commitments, binding targets, let's say, at national level deriving from the European one. So this is something that is very, very complicated. And on top of it, if you are in a situation in which politically there is a little bit of hostility in accepting the regulations and the rules, it will be very important for the different industrial sectors and for civil society in general to push for this to be implemented, because, as it was said by Marco, the direction is set, but then you need certainties. And And I think that the Energy Efficiency Directive at a certain moment, I don't know if Anne agrees with me, really run the risk to be completely irrelevant, because if you reduce too much its effect of being a binding regulation, then of course it becomes irrelevant. And my problem with the EPBD is exactly that, with the building directive. That's the countries that already decided to go ahead will go ahead, and those who will not will not. Mm-hmm. And this is for the European Green Deal one of the worst risks that we have in front of us, not only for energy efficiency, but certainly for energy efficiency, because it's not simply to put a solar panel or a windmill, but it's much more complex as a system, not more difficult, but let's say you need to do a lot of convincing and to really be motivated to change the ways. So I think that you probably have a good legislative framework. We will have to see what happens with the EPBD, but the connection between the national and the European is probably not as effective as I would have liked to see.
And implementation is meant to happen via the national energy and climate plans, right? I mean, especially when it comes to heat, which is always very local. And there's no guarantee that all the member states will actually start doing something about heat. Those which are interested will do it, and others will simply...
Yes, but on the other hand, you saw in the last year that with the war and the pressure on gas bills, notably, you really had a very big diminution of energy consumption. Of course, the winter was not very hot, very, very cold. But I think that it would be very interesting to see at the end of the summer, you know, when we will see if it was hot or not. But so what I mean by this is that there are certain trends which are already there, but they need to be encouraged. They need to find the financial support. They need to find the right framework in order to do things well. And I think that that is the main role of European legislation, also to help implementation. Because, and I finish here, it is very clear that when the Commissioner, for example, gives guidelines or is, you know, after the member state for the implementation, is very different than when you say, okay, you do whatever you like.
Yeah. Alexandra, Tudoroiu-Lakavičė, are you confident that member states will follow up in their national energy and climate plans with, you know, ambitious objectives when it comes to heat recovery?
Well, we've looked a lot and assessed the heating and cooling assessments that had to be carried out by 2020. That's where really member states had to look into detail at the potential of high efficiency CHP, decarbonizing district heating, waste heat. So we've gone through all of the assessments, and they're generally very good. They tick all the boxes, look at CHP, look at industrial waste heat, CHP in industry, CHP in buildings, and the other clean sources for heating and cooling. However, they tend to remain just nice reports that are written, published on the European Commission's website, translated into English so that we can all read them, but then they do not translate necessarily into policy. Right. This is why we've been advocating for this heating and cooling assessments to actually be used in the context of or correlated at least, or synchronized with the NECPs. Right. That would be a good idea.
But that's not the case.
I think in the next round of NECPs, they should be taken into account. So that, again, we look holistically at the energy system with heat, electricity, gas systems all taken into account in a systematic way. So I have hope for the next 2-3 years that perhaps that will happen more and more. If we look on the other side at electricity, we see that more and more member states worry about adequacy and system adequacy capacity and the availability of dispatchable electricity to complement intermittent PV and wind, and to cope with the peak demand that will increasingly come up. So I think we need to really look from a systems perspective and synergies between heat and electricity. And as Marco was pointing out, if we're able to recover waste heat and then convert it into electricity that can help the electricity system, that would be great. So again, I have hope that more and more, depending on how our energy system needs evolve, we will be able to actually think in a more energy efficient and systems perspective.
So if I can summarize, we have a good mapping, therefore, with those national evaluations. It's now just a matter of doing it, and for that there is no certainty, right? And Weidenbach, maybe a few thoughts on this, because we're reaching now the end of the cycle with this Parliament and Commission, and everybody's saying, okay, next Commission is going to be the implementing Commission. So is there something, you know, that you would be keen to watch in the next national energy climate plans, or maybe additional things that the Commission would want to consider to make sure that the countries actually tap into that potential of waste heat?
It sounds a bit like, okay, the next National Energy and Climate Plan, so we are now waiting for the updated NECPs. There are already some member states who submitted in time. But I hope, I mean, that also the year until we have the final update NECPs in June 2024, that member states see the need and to implement quickly the requirement to have local and regional heating plans. I think this is really key to involve the local and regional level, which has not been the case in all member states by now. I think this is one key issue. And okay, we have the problem of not problem, but the point of subsidiarity, that we cannot really reach out as a Commission to the local and regional level. But what we can do is to encourage member states, either by the EU budget or by smart programs, to provide the let's say some part of earmarked budget for the local and regional level, who can really play a role in waste heat recovery or excessive heat recovery. That's one point. And then also I would like to point out that maybe one very, very important requirement, it's the energy savings obligation, could also be further used to promote the use of excess heat. And there, member states have clear targets. And I think colleagues in DG ENER are working on guidance. I think this will help. I don't know what the priorities of the next Commission will be, but clearly I wouldn't say, would never claim that we have a framework that must never be changed again, but it would already be a great action if we implement it, if we focus on implementation. On the other hand, the Commission is also working on the 2040 energy and climate targets. Let's see what the next Commission will take as a follow-up action on these targets.
Jozefien Vanbecelaere, maybe on this connection between the EU and the national level, are you worried that there could be a gap there where the member states actually don't really do much when it comes to waste heat recovery?
Yeah, I think indeed that it's very important what Anne mentioned, these local heat plannings or heat mapping, that this is really a key factor, and that there's a lot more don't know if you can call it education or awareness needed also in urban planning, for example, that you, if you are planning a new swimming pool in the city, that you could place it next to, I don't know, if you have an icing rink, that the cooling, the excess heat from cooling the ice skating rink can be used to heat the swimming pool. These type of things, like very concrete examples that municipalities pick this up and put this in the planning to avoid waste heat. But also now in what we mentioned in the Energy Efficiency Directive, where you have this mandatory use of excess heat on data centers, that we extend this, that we use this now as an example, but also in the future extend this to other commercial buildings that have excess heat, and really regulate that they should come up with a plan on what to do with this excess heat. Can they use it again in the process nearby, in the industry nearby, or to heat up houses in the surroundings, these type of things, that we further extend this regulation of waste heat.
Okay, maybe I can turn now to the audience for some questions, if there are anybody in the room, maybe to start with, who would like to put a question to the panelists. Don't hesitate to raise your hand. Otherwise, I think we do have a number of questions online already. So I think we can maybe just pick a question online to start with.
I'm helping Frédéric here with the questions coming online. They vary. Not so sure you can all elaborate on the base of the second law of thermodynamics. Marco? No. This is, I think, pertinent. Isn't all reused waste heat to be considered as fossil-free, meaning any reused heat will replace primary fuel?
And I guess maybe Marco Baresi can have a go at that one.
Yes, but I was an engineer, because now I'm devoted to these other things. So if I understand right, the question...
Isn't all reused waste heat to be considered as fossil-free, meaning that any reused heat will replace primary fuel?
As I told at the beginning, when you see, for example, steel industry, and you see the waste heat, if you don't recover this waste heat, is simply wasted in the atmosphere, hot in the air. So in my opinion, if you recover this waste heat and you valorize to do heat or to produce electricity, you don't need additional primary energy, so it's CO2 free by definition. So the reply is yes.
Yes. Maybe in the context of CHP, I know that there's always a confusion regarding how to account for CO2 emissions, yes. Whether it's the electricity generated or is it the heat, and which method is the best or most accurate. So maybe in that context.
I mean, that really echoes the discussion we had in the beginning with the definitions, right? So maybe it can be considered not renewable, but low carbon.
Yeah, we have different ways of course, understanding CHP. When it comes to the definition of waste heat in the Renewables Directive, CHP is almost prioritized because the definition says that waste heat is the heat that can be recovered before or after CHP is used. So ideally, you should develop CHP first. So if you burn any fuel, be it natural gas or biomass or biogases, then you should use those fuels as efficiently as possible with CHP. And then whatever waste heat is still left, you should try to recover it even more so. However, we see other approaches or perspectives when it comes to CHP. Of course, in the future, we will need a lot of electricity and flexible electricity. So CHP can become more flexible and be electricity driven. That means that you produce electricity when the electricity is valuable, when it is needed, and then you recover the heat save it and use it when the heat is needed. So in that case, the CHP would be producing flexible electricity for the electricity system, and then the heat that is recovered is actually recovered waste heat. And so that complicates things a bit, but we also have to be flexible and see how the energy system evolves, and then have definitions that evolve with the needs of the energy system, I would say, rather than be stuck in, okay, waste heat is only the heat that you can recover from these and these sources, and that you can only use in these and these applications. So that's my answer.
Yes, if I can add something also.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
If you consider, for example, the waste heat into district heating is a way to valorize the residual heat, the excess heat, and the district heating development is the only way to valorize this waste heat in, for example, in urban area or so on. And could be a very good option. We are looking at the future with a lot of electrification of heat, electrification of everything. And so we will need a lot of electricity in the future. On the other side, if you need heat, for example, for domestic house or the other, if you have a district heating, you can use district heating, and so the waste heat in the district heating to lower the needs of electricity, so to balance is a way to contribute to the overall scheme.
Yeah. Maybe other people on the panel want to react or respond to the initial question about fossil free, or maybe we can move just to the next one. Yeah.
Also, well, topical, perhaps controversial. Heat recovery from nuclear energy. Is this included in EU legislation?
Pink waste heat.
Joker.
Well, from a CHP perspective, so if we consider recovering waste heat from cooling towers or avoiding the waste heat from cooling towers, and then we apply to nuclear, nuclear power plants are generally can get an exemption. Normally, power plants, large power plants, when you build one, you need to consider CHP so that you don't waste the heat, but you produce both electricity and heat. But then if you build a power plant, then you can benefit from an exemption. Although a lot of heat is wasted when nuclear power is produced. So
right.
It could be a potential application for waste heat recovery.
There's limited use of heat from nuclear power plants and district heating systems. COGEN Europe had an annual conference last week. We actually had a representative from Ukraine, from the agency responsible for energy efficiency and energy savings. And I believe about 30% of the electricity and 30% of the heat in Ukraine is derived from CHP. But in the case of Ukraine, they utilize a lot of the waste heat from nuclear power plants. But it's not the case in every country. There was a last question here regarding renewable waste heat shall originate from renewable primary energy. And I think Marco already addressed this in a way. And in the United States, waste heat is considered renewable, but does renewable waste heat have to come from renewables?
Yes, but we are talking about definition. I'm not a fan to classify the waste heat as renewable. What we are discussing today is how to valorize the waste heat. Is the correct way to valorize the waste heat is to include in the renewable definition? Okay, if you classify the waste heat as zero CO2, carbon neutral also, but we need to act in order to valorize this source.
Monica Frassoni, you seem to be having. Okay. You do.
In the sense that it's probably not very useful to define it as renewable.
But carbon-free makes sense.
Yeah, carbon-free makes sense. But as I said earlier, we have to consider this whole thing as a system.
Yeah.
You know, so. in the sense that to invest a hell of a lot in having excess heat recovery, excess heat recovery from gas or whatever is probably less of a forward-looking investment or a forward-looking work than to do it from renewables or from other sources. So that's the whole thing I am saying, and that is why I agree with Marco.
So we use a rebrand because energy efficiency is not sexy. So now we have to rebrand. So this is a joke.
Alexandra, Tudoroiu-Lakavičė, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, on the renewable versus not renewable debate, of course, by 2050, we will need most of our energy to come from renewables, probably almost all of it. So that helps us achieve the net zero goal. So by 2050 or even before 2050, we'll need to reach net zero emissions. What we also need to bear in mind is that we also have a carbon budget. So we should reach net zero, but we should also reach it by limiting as much as possible the emissions that we do generate. So if there's a way now to reduce emissions, even if it's waste heat from fossil fuels or waste heat that we recover from fossil fuels, which basically saves us energy and reduces the amount of emissions we generate, then I think we shouldn't brand it as, if it reduces emissions, we should count it as an emission reducing solution rather than count it as a fossil fuel sourced waste heat. That's not helpful to label waste heat as fossil fuel or renewable fueled, if it actually either way helps us reduce our emissions.
Yeah. Labeling maybe doesn't matter that much when you have the emissions trading scheme in place, which obliges you anyway to reduce those emissions. So, I mean, that in itself should be enough of an incentive, I imagine, to recover this waste heat, or is it not? Maybe a question for Marco Baresi?
Sorry, probably I not catch your
whether
question.
The ETS in itself does not provide sufficient incentives to recover the waste heat that is being produced. Something more needs to happen.
To give an idea, if you recover the waste heat to generate power, is not included in the ETS. So this is an example of how can improve, for example, the ETS in this sense.
So that's an incentive, you're saying? Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Jozefien Vanbecelaere, maybe views about incentive schemes?
On the ETS, that I leave to Marco. But more in general, maybe on incentives, I would also say that what we also need in addition is more a target to for electrification of industry, because there we see that all industrial process heat up to 200 degrees. That's 37% of industrial heat. So that's and all of that, all heat up to 200 degrees you can heat pump, or how do you say, that's all heat pumpable. So what is currently done with gas boilers can transfer to heat pumps, and then you really again think more in systems, because there again a very concrete example, if you have a chocolate factory, at one point in this process you need to cool, and then at another point you need to heat, and there you can again use the excess heat from the cooling part in this process to heat another part of the process. And I heard from one of our members during our forum last year that he had such an example. He went to this company and they asked, yeah, we want to install a heat pump to heat our offices. And then he said, but can I look at here at your factory, at the processes? And then he discovered that they have this huge cooling need, they have a huge heating need, and he proposed a whole redesign of their system to really close the energy cycle and to really use this excess heat. So this is something that should be considered much more as well. And it's really also about creating awareness, because there's not enough awareness in the people, the engineers that design these systems, in planners and so on. So this is an additional thing that should be considered.
Okay. Hans, any other questions?
I think a lot of statements and a lot of examples of waste heat recovery and a lot of agreement that we need. There's a lot of potential. I won't get into them, but no specific questions at this point, so we could maybe wrap it up.
Yes, we'll wrap it up, and so maybe I'll start with you and Weidenbach, and maybe you were talking about this guidance document that the Commission has been working on. I hear that it's something that's been around or discussed for a moment. Do you have any idea of when it could be published? Is it going to be under this commission or for the next commission?
What concerns the heat pump action plan, which is also focusing on district heating and cooling, and then also on waste heat, this our idea is to propose it for adoption still this year. For the guidance notes, I don't think that there is, let's say, a formal adoption planned, but I know that colleagues are working on it because they want to support member states in an early implementation. So I guess they will come up with guidance notes as soon as possible. So that's the point.
Okay, so before we close, maybe I'll ask each one of you in turn to say in just a couple of sentences what you would like the main message for our audience to take away with them, and maybe we can start with you and Weidenbach.
I think my main message would be to also to promote the idea to revisit planning processes. I mean, like spatial planning for small cities or bigger cities. I think this was one aspect we haven't really touched upon, but that I see the need to make best use of waste or excessive heat is also to allow buildings be built where the heat is needed or the cold is needed. And this is one message. We talk a lot about the energy system, but there are other authorities involved, and so also to get let's say other administrative places in this scene of local and regional authorities get involved, that they are aware that they reconsider the spatial planning, for example.
Okay, thanks. Monica Frassoni, your main message for today?
Well, I think that the main message is that we need to give value to excess heat recovery, because we need to give more value and visibility to the whole energy saving agenda. And I think that we all have to see how the different sectors can work together on this, because I believe that the possibility of getting more visibility and attention to this agenda, notwithstanding what happens in the different legislation at EU level, is quite important, because the challenge will be the implementation.
Okay, Alexandra, Tudoroiu-Lakavičė.
Yes, I think we need to be ambitious with our energy and climate objectives, of course. And then when it comes to waste heat recovery and excess heat recovery, we must take a broad energy systems approach when it comes to the sources of waste heat, but also when it comes to the applications for waste heat. So that's it from me.
Jozefien Vanbecelaere.
Yeah, first of all, I would say change the word waste heat to excess heat, and it's great that already we are doing this in this panel, so that's perfect. And then that there's much more excess heat available than is currently considered in the different legislations, and that it should be opened up. Yeah, as also Alexandra said, make it open for different applications, different sources, and create awareness, yeah, about all the benefits it brings and the efficiencies.
Okay, and Marco Baresi to conclude.
Yes, I agree with the suggestion of the panelist. I'd like to remark the needs of the awareness of all the actors involved in this process. We mentioned it before, the local activity. I'm very glad to be part of this HEATLEAP project because we show a cooperation between the utility in the local area, steel industry involved in the community, technology developer has, and also university and technological and technical part. All the people all these actors were involved in this project, and in my opinion is we have to spread these activities, and we have to exploit in other countries, because we have to involve more, for example, the industrial player. We discussed it before with Ori Martin. We have a long time cooperation and he told me now the sustainability manager is one of the key figures of the industry, because they developed steel, but they need to do in a green way, and all the some steel companies like Ori understand that, for example, the valorization of waste heat or these kind of projects are key for competitiveness, because they decrease the cost, for the sustainability, but also for the social acceptance and for the social issue. So I hope this project could be an example, pivotal.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this brings us now to the end of this event. Thank you very much to our panelists for coming today. Thanks to the HEATLEAP project managers for organizing it. I hand over the floor to Hans Koldberg from COGEN Europe for some very final concluding.
In fact, I'll hand it over to Marco, who will give us the concluding remarks. But how about a hand to the panel first?
I had some notes before related to the project. In short, there are some key takeaways from this afternoon session. Waste heat recovery is an opportunity, so we understand. Technology are there. Most of them technology are ready for the exploitation. We need, of course, to increase also the availability of technology and to develop innovation. The barriers, we have seen policy, but we need commitment at EU level, but also commitment at local level, at industrial level. What I say before, so is a way for a common path. Yes, nothing to add. I told you before the external benefit of waste heat and energy efficiency in general, and in my opinion, there is no additional words to say on that. So thank you very much for all the partners that contributed to the project, and also thank you very much for the panelists that contribute to the debate. It was an interesting debate, in my opinion, today in the afternoon, and also all the people online and here in the room. Thank you. Now I think it's time for the aperitif.
Yes, there'll be a cocktail at the end.
Thank you.
Maybe we can invite all the HEATLEAP partners for a family photo before the end, before we all make our ways.
Thank you so much. Merci.